Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever and wherever this podcast may find you. To all you people from the future, please, no spoiler alerts. Welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today I'm going to be welcoming Ben Hunt, author of the Epsilon Theory, a very popular blog and newsletter. I shouldn't really call it a blog, it's a newsletter and a website. And Ben is a big fan of Bitcoin and the community, but he is not convinced that it will actually be successful in its rebellion. And we go over this in the podcast at large, and I think it was a very, very good discussion. I think it's very important to talk to people who are outside the circle of Bitcoin, who are outside our sphere that we usually talk to. He is not somebody that's anti-Bitcoin, but he is somebody that does not believe, as we do, that it will achieve its goals. So I think it's very important to talk to people like this, especially people who are as tuned in and as intelligent as Ben is. I know you guys are going to really, really like this. So first, if you guys could do me a huge favor, go over to iTunes, leave me a ratings and review. And next, if you could thank my new sponsor, the very first sponsor of the podcast, eToro. They are a trading website that predated Bitcoin. They trade all the major all the major cryptocurrencies, to include Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, all that kind of good stuff. They offer some really innovative packages, such as virtual trading, where you can practice strategies without risking real money, but using real trade books. And you could also do really interesting stuff like copy trading, where you could just follow a trader that you think is very good, and you can actually copy their trades in real time. It's a really, really cool service. You can buy and sell Bitcoin there, just like any other exchange. And I think that you guys are going to really like them. Head over to didyouknowcrypto.com/eToro. That's didyouknowcrypto.com/eToro, eToro. Please go through that link. I'd really appreciate it. Or just didyouknowcrypto.com in the sidebar right there. So before we go into the episode, I also really quick want to thank you guys for listening. You guys make it all possible. I really, really do appreciate it. And I'm not just saying that. I really do appreciate you guys taking your time and putting your trust in listening to me weekly. So without further ado, thank you very much and enjoy the show. Today, I welcome Ben Hunt, co-founder and chief investment officer of Second Foundation Partners and the creator of Epsilon Theory, a newsletter and website that investigates trends in markets, culture, and politics through the lenses of history and game theory. It's an excellent resource that everyone should be reading daily. It's at epsilontheory.com. And to very roughly paraphrase Nathan Hale, since I was kind of discovered it quite recently, and I only have but one regret to give, and that's that I didn't start to actually reading Epsilon Theory earlier. But Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dustin. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And before we jump into the rest of the discussion, some of the listeners may not be familiar with you. So if you wouldn't mind kind of giving a little background on yourself, how you got into finance, how you started Epsilon Theory, and kind of how you first kind of found out about Bitcoin, or how I like to call it, how Bitcoin found you.
Sure, happy to do that. So, I've done a lot of different things. I'm 55 years old. As my wife would say, I can't keep a job. I got a PhD in political science, of all oxymorons. Got that up at Harvard. They call it government up there, political science everywhere else. And then I was a professor for 10 years. I was first at New York University, and then with tenured spot down at SMU in Dallas. But I always had the entrepreneurial bug, and I'm sure you recognize this, and a lot of your listeners will too. I mean, it really is a bug. It's not a feature. I was really a self-taught coder. I started my first software company while I was in grad school. Founded another one when I was a junior professor, and then finally left academia and moved from Texas back up to the New York area to co-found a software company um, in this Connecticut, New York area. So it was very boring software, but that was a good thing because we started the company the day the Nasdaq bubble burst. So we started that software company in March of 2000. But because it was a nice, boring software company, and I really mean boring. I mean, this was is for schematics and parts diagrams for construction equipment. So it really doesn't get much more boring than this. But it was great. It was I'll say it was cool software, and we built a nice little company. I sold my stake in the company. This I guess would be about 2003. I did 2 years of venture capital, and then but one of the early funders in the company was the head of research at a larger investment shop here in Connecticut, and he said, "Look, we're putting together some employee money, and we're going to start a little long short fund. You and I were always talking about companies in the tech sector. Why don't you come here and try your hand at the biggest game in the world, which is the game of public markets?" So I joined that firm, and we were managing a little hedge fund. This was in 2005. We did well in '05, did better in '06, did great in '07, and then we did incredibly well in '08. So that was a real career year for us. It was one of those issues, and I think this will be familiar also to probably yourself, a lot of your readers, but or your listeners rather. But there are times in the world when having an outside perspective is really valuable, and certainly capital markets, public markets in 2007, going into the big crisis in 2008, coming out of it 2009. That was one of those times. It was very helpful that I didn't come out of Wall Street, that I did have a fresh or different perspective. And so, like I say, we did really well. So the money came, rolling in after that. We got the hedge fund up to about $1 billion. But the weird thing was that from March of 2009 onwards, and this is an experience I think that so many hedge funds and asset managers have had over the past decade. For the March of 2009 on, it was like you went to the wall and you flipped a switch, and just our returns just flatlined. Where we had been doing 20-25% a year, even in '08. We never lost money for our clients, which is something I'm still really proud of. But our returns totally flatlined from March of '09 onwards, which not coincidentally is when the Fed and then other central banks in the world started taking such an activist policy with extraordinary differences in the way that any monetary policy had been run before. So it was going into the summer of 2012. That was the summer where the euro looked to be on the ropes. And I had a big short position set up on Europe, and I was like, all right, I've seen this movie before. I know how this is going to end. We are perfectly well positioned. We're going to kill it. And it was towards the end of the summer. It was August, in fact, of it's about 2 weeks from now, where the euro seemed like it'd be collapsed, and then Mario Draghi comes out and says, "Well, we'll do whatever it takes," and makes a couple more speeches, and everything shifts on a dime. And we navigated that loss fine. Like I say, we never lost money for our clients, but I was kicked in the teeth. Mario Draghi kicked me in the teeth in the summer of 2012 with his words, with nothing but words, and that was the moment for me where I realized, this just isn't working. What we do, the way we think about investing, it isn't working. So the end of 2012, and my wife still hasn't forgiven me for this, but we gave all the money back. We gave all the money back to clients. And I said, well, I want to try to figure out, well, what does work? How do we think about how words and narrative have really supplanted fundamentals in driving market outcomes? So I started writing about this, and this is the blog, I named Epsilon Theory. So this is the summer of 2013, and the name comes from really the most basic formula for understanding, or at least the traditional economic way of understanding, academic economic way of understanding portfolio management, which is that your returns in a portfolio are equal to alpha, right? The idiosyncratic returns that you figure out, the way you beat the market, plus beta, which is how you track the general market. And then in this equation, everybody forgets this, but all these econometric equations have this. They have plus epsilon, the E term for error. And the truth is that everything we think of in terms of behavioral economics, everything we think of in terms of I'll call to use a poker expression, playing the player rather than playing the cards. That's not really error, right? But that's where it lives in our traditional academic economic understanding of how portfolios work. So I called this Epsilon Theory. I called my blog Epsilon Theory, and I started writing a little note, and I sent it email to 100 friends and former clients, and it really struck a chord, Dustin. So again, this is the summer of 2013 with 100 emails, and since then, I mean, we've got about 100,000 people on our email list today, and that's all through word of mouth, all from people adopting it and forwarding it on, and it's really changed the way I think about the world, because I really started writing Epsilon Theory in that summer of 2013, and from I'll call it a pretty dark place. I was trying to figure it out, and I didn't think anybody else understood or was experiencing the same really crisis of faith, because what's being challenged here are all of our old assumptions about what makes markets work. And what I've learned is that everyone, or tens of thousands of professional investors, are being racked by these same sort of crisis of faith and trying to figure it out. So I about 6 months later, I joined a firm, an asset manager, Houston, called Salient Partners, managed about $13 billion, and I was their strategist and chief risk officer, and really got a chance to keep writing and keep trying to figure this out. And then I had the opportunity to take this all independent last fall. So that's my company now, Second Foundation Partners. It's a nod, a reference to the Isaac Asimov Foundation trilogy, the science fiction trilogy. And since last fall, what I do is, with my partner, Rusty Gwynn, we write, we do research, and we do consulting for institutional investors. So that's the nickel tour of my career and where I come out, and what we're particularly focused on, and what you'll see if you go to the website, is that we're really I think we've made some significant breakthroughs in applications of natural language processing, NLP, to investments, and that's where we do most of our research. This is the research that I did 30 years ago when I was, writing my PhD in my first book. We didn't call it natural language processing back then, and I'd have undergrads code, newspaper articles off of microfiche, and I would do my programming on a digital equipment mini frame, and you probably don't have any listeners who are old enough to remember those old DEC machines.
No, I don't think so.
but that's how things have changed. So now where we have this incredible um, ability just to plug into computing processor power really as a utility, it's really changed what's possible for doing a rigorous and scientific analysis of narrative of the unstructured data that pervades everything we do in investing and politics. So that's what I write about. That's our research, and that's how it got me where I am today.
So as far as, I mean, obviously this show is kind of focused for the moment. I'm going to expand out actually a little bit more in the future, but it is focused on Bitcoin mainly because I first got into it for the reasons that a lot of people did years back, was just kind of this uh, distrust of central banks, their policies, and like you alluded to, the false signals that they create in these markets, right? And in my opinion, lead to these boom bust cycles that we see, where entrepreneurs are given false signals of when to invest and when to save and all these sorts of things. And I thought that Bitcoin would offer a better system. And I'm wondering, I guess let's just jump right into it, because
Yeah,
what really got me interested was I read a couple, I was really excited to get you on because of your last one of your last articles, the one on the Spanish prisoner, and I'd only been reading for probably about 2 months, so then that one really jumped out. We already had this on the books, so I was really excited to talk about this. Is that you had already back in 2015 described Bitcoin as a if I'm pronouncing this right, an effete rebellion.
yeah, an effete rebellion. Yeah,
Feet.
yeah, that was a slam, and I feel bad about that now. So
No,
the
we've all been there. Everybody that's in Bitcoin, when you first read about it, it makes absolutely no sense, or even if it does kind of make sense, you always have I don't. There's very few people that immediately saw it and went, okay, this is a great thing. So everyone has their
well, well,
story.
well, I'll tell you, Dustin. I mean, it made sense, right? And I, look, the long history of cryptocurrencies, not in a actually in what I think is an incredibly elegant um, formulation that Bitcoin has. But what really drove me to write that note was that even then, when people were talking about this as being some form of I'll call routing around the state, that this was an alternative to the government and their use of fiat, I think I think it's weak sauce, right? And what I mean by that is that why I called it kind of an effete rebellion. It was, it was a lot of people in my experience, at least in 2015, who was kind of the equivalent of getting a tattoo, but not a tattoo on your neck, right? But getting a tattoo on your upper arm, so that you could, cover it with your shirt and go into work, and nobody would know you had a tattoo. It was a very safe way of being a bad boy, right? It's like, oh, I'm a rebel against the system and the man, and so I'm dabbling in Bitcoin, and I still think there's a fair amount of that, but what was really changed for me over the last 3 years is having coming to appreciate so much more the positive energy in what I'll call is the crypto community, right? That it's not posers, and that there are so many people who like I was, and again, not to sound kind of avuncular, when I was your age, right? Having the same sort of desires to change the world, and maybe make some money doing it, and that combined, the second big note I wrote about Bitcoin was in 2017, and it was called "Too Clever by Half," and that's still probably the most widely read note I've ever written. And that was a note where I was saying, look, I am what I like to call a coyote, right? It's an animal that lives outside my farm here, and they're really smart. and I just think they're fantastic animals, right? But they're very poor at playing the meta game. They're very poor at seeing the big picture, and they always end up being taken out and shot in the street by an animal control officer, and because they piss off the normies, and they don't know that, kind of how to behave when all these people move out into the country where I live now, and they think they want to live out in the country, and then they get out here and there are a couple of coyotes that go through their yard, and all of a sudden they freak out, right? Because little Jenny and little Johnny are playing on the swing set and they want to be out in nature, but oh my goodness, you mean nature actually has fangs and claws. So this, I'd seen exactly the same thing happen in the investing we did in 2008, because the way our hedge fund killed it in 2008 was to recognize that this enormous asset class that existed in mortgage-backed securities, $10 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities, was really just rested on a single assumption, and that was that it was impossible to have a nationwide decline in home prices. And if you violated that assumption, then the whole house of cards would come falling down. And it's not at all that I think that Bitcoin has the same sort of I'll call it vulnerabilities. What upsets me is that the coyotes I knew, the smart guys who didn't get the big picture, who comprised entire firms, like Bear Stearns was a firm full of coyotes, and again, I'm using it as a compliment, and that was a great firm. And in April of 2008, that entire firm was taken out in the street and was shot as an example to others by federal regulators. And it of course it wasn't just a unique case. I mean, it was rampant throughout all of Wall Street, and it just upsets me to this day that so many of the coyotes, the smart guys who were trying to make a buck, and we're doing it, I'll say, the right way by through financial innovation, in this case mortgage-backed securities, ended up having their careers ruined, while at the same time this other type of creature that I talk about in this note, the raccoon, who are the con men and the hucksters, they got through the financial crisis and the devastation that hit Wall Street. They got through just fine, Thank you very much. And it really struck me in 2017, where a lot of these raccoons, a lot of these con men and hucksters, who had been front and center with the housing bubble and the mortgage-backed securities, right, and the liar loans and the Alt-A and all of that. They're back doing exactly the same damn thing with Bitcoin, and that was what really possessed me to write that note, right? Which is that what always happens in these circumstances is the government is very concerned about coyote control. They are always going to find a way to co-opt, to take the whatever the new technology is. If it has to do with money, if it has to do with finance, they're going to the government will co-opt it, and they will either take some coyotes and shoot them in the head like animal control officers do, or they'll domesticate them. But they'll let the raccoons go free, and I saw then the same thing happening with Bitcoin, and so that I'm still seeing the same thing, right? And that's why I wrote the note about the Spanish prisoner, which is this famous con game, which is how I would describe Libra, right? So Libra and this kind of censorship embracing stablecoin that Facebook and the Libra Association is putting out, right? This is how government ends up co-opting this entire effort, right? Because it and whether it happens with Libra or not, it'll be the next one or the next one, right? But essentially, these e-cash, electronic cash, is coming, and it's not an alternative to fiat. It is fiat, right? And instead, Bitcoin's going to be relegated to the same role that gold true believers have had for the last 50 years. And I got to tell you, it's a ghetto, right? I mean, you're given kind of a pat on the head and said, "Oh yes, you're a store of value. Aren't you a good boy?" And you're put over here in a corner. And I see the same damn thing happening all over again. And that's what gets me frustrated and gets me writing these notes about Bitcoin. Not because I don't appreciate it. I do. I think it's brilliant and it's elegant. I think that the underlying technology, when you the questions of distributed trust are some of the most important questions I want to solve, right? But they're not about money. It's when you try to apply this to the creation of money, where you run directly into the existential nature of the modern state, and that is a battle that I've seen fought and lost before, and I'm seeing exactly the same thing happening again.
Well, we saw that. I mean, Liberty Reserve was squashed quite quickly. I think that that aspect of centralization was also one of the, that kind of was probably at the forefront of the minds of Satoshi and whoever else may have been involved in the project early on, because money that is the underpinning of power for any nation state. If you don't have control of the money, if you don't have control of that purse, whether or not the government directly controls it or whether or not they kind of delegate that to in the way that we do with the Federal Reserve, which is quasi-private, I guess, if you want to call it that way. But I take your point. And I highly agree that the question of the question that Bitcoin brings about is bigger than just money. This concept of decentralized consensus is a much bigger question and a much bigger, it's that is the meta game. To me overall, and there's so many different aspects of. But actually, I was wondering if you could describe the Spanish prisoner con.
Sure.
Because when I was reading your thing, and you had the and this is also, I'm not the first one to say this as well, but all the different quotes and things that you have in there to tie your article together are great. And I'd never actually watched that Steve Martin movie, so I went on to Prime and I subscribed to Cinemax because they were the only ones that had it, and I specifically watched that right afterwards, and it was a great movie. So if anybody has not seen it, should go and watch it after this. But if you could describe the Spanish prisoner con, because it's not only will help them kind of understand your point on Libra, but also to kind of recognize this con that is kind of constantly going on in politics and in finance and all around us.
Yeah, you're so right. So you're right. The movie's phenomenal. So it's by David Mamet, the playwright. So some of your listeners might be more familiar with Glenn Ross, which is another amazing. It was originally a play, Glenn Ross, then made into a movie. The Spanish prisoner, David Mamet, wrote the script, directly for a movie, and it's got Steve Martin in this dramatic role. He's just amazing in it. It's my favorite, like I say, dramatic role for Steve Martin. But yeah, he's a con man because the Spanish prisoner is the name of is probably the oldest kind of named con in the world. It goes back. You can read examples of this going back, a couple of hundred years, and I'm sure it existed before then. But the basic gist of the Spanish prisoner is that somebody comes to you and they're your friend and they seem a little down on their luck, and you say, well, what's wrong? They say, oh, well, my fortune and my beautiful sister are being held prisoner. They're still back in Spain, right? And it's just I've just had to come to grips with that, but I just don't know how in the world I can ever get my fortune back and get my beautiful sister out of this the prison where she's being held by the evil government. Here's a picture of my sister. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she beautiful? And he said, well, surely there must be something we can do, my friend, to help you. And well, I mean, if there was a person, who could, kind of front the money for this plan I have, well, I suppose that would work. I'll put I don't have a lot, of money myself, but I'll put everything I have into this, of course. And if we're successful, why you'll be doing such a good deed for the world, and of course, you can have a big chunk of my money because you're the one taking the risk here. And I'm sure my sister will be very grateful if you know what I mean, and I think you do. And so that's the gist of the Spanish prisoner con. Now, of course, the way it actually is used by con men everywhere is it's not an actual human being who's being held prisoner, right? And it's not actually some bank account that we're going to try to liberate here. It's what another film director, Alfred Hitchcock, called a MacGuffin. So the MacGuffin is the object of desire, right? It can be anything, right? It's some often noble purpose, right? Like Libra tells you, why we're going to bank the unbanked. You will be doing such good in the world by supporting Libra. And by the way, I think you'll be able to make some money with this too. See, that's what drives the Spanish prisoner con doesn't work on a criminal, right? Because the Spanish prisoner con, you're doing good. You're helping somebody out. If you're trying to run the Spanish prisoner con on another sociopath, it's not going to work, right? Because the motivation here to free somebody from bondage, and make some money on the side, right? That doesn't work on a sociopath, and it also doesn't work on a really honest person, right? Or a person who's not very smart because they don't get it, right? They don't get, I can really do something good here and I can make some money here as well. What it works on again what I like to call coyotes. And works on people like me, right? I mean, we want to do good, we want to do the right thing, but we're also kind of on the make, right? I mean, we're also looking to make a buck. And so that's the person, that smart person, that really smart person who wants to do right in the world, but also wants to make some money. That is the person who is the perfect mark for the Spanish prisoner con. And I think probably if every listener to this podcast is honest about him or herself, you'd say, I kind of fit that description. I want to do right. I want to do good. And I also I'm a little bit on the make, right? I'm looking for a way to make a buck. And what I'm telling you is that you are the perfect mark for the Spanish prisoner con. And the Spanish prisoner con is run all the time, not by, Steve Martin, sociopath con man, right? But it's run by political parties. It's run by governments. It's run by corporations. It's run by anyone who holds out for you. Oh, you're going to accomplish this great good. All we need you to do is we need you to commit, not your money, but your mind, right? You come, work for us here, right? And you'll be doing so much good in the world, and you'll make some money too. And what they're really trying to do, what they're really after, is to take your imagination, your mindfulness, your time, and they'll throw you aside. They really will. And it's again, it's something when you start looking for it, and you'll see it everywhere around you. And so I think that is what goes on with so much around, particularly in our financial world, the business of finance, where if you're in this business long enough, you'll see this Spanish prisoner con being rolled out time after time after time.
It was interesting in your article, the Spanish prisoner. You talked about how Libra is Caesar's coin, and that was really interesting to me because it was kind of very synchronous with a video a friend of mine, Vitamani, had put out, where he uses that same gospel story to make the case for Bitcoin. Right. In short, for listeners who are not familiar with this gospel story, it's basically some Jewish leaders who tried to trap Jesus into being kind of a hypocrite, or what they really wanted was for him to publicly speak out against Roman rule. So they ask him whether or not it's okay to pay taxes to Caesar. And he replied by asking them to produce a coin that could be used to pay the tax. And the coin had Caesar's face on it. And it was presented, and Jesus said to give to Caesar what is the Caesar's and give to God's what is God's, right? It was a very, very eloquent way of kind of phrasing that without being kind of trapped into where they were trying to get him into. And Vince's point was that, I'm very heavily paraphrasing this, is that fiat money is Caesar's money, and your point as well. So is Libra, because it is based mostly on fiat, as well as some other assets that are usually denominated in fiat as well. But it's the values of all those things are the scarcity of them are all based kind of basically on the decree of the modern Caesars of the day, where Bitcoin's its operations, its scarcity is based on math. You can literally hash Bitcoin by hand if you really wanted to. It'd be very inadvisable because it's going to be a complete waste of your time to do so. But you can do it. The technology assists the operation of the protocol, but it's not per se required. It can be done if you wanted to by hand. But math is universal, or I should say that the truths that math describes exist with or without kind of our recognition or interaction with it. And does this kind of offer a counterpoint of Bitcoin, to not totally get very theological on it, but Bitcoin being of God, or fiat's and Libras of Caesar's, as Bitcoin being a counterpoint to the modern Caesarian coin.
Yeah, with all respect, I think that's a pretty flawed reading of both the parable and then also the current state of the world and where Bitcoin sits in it. And what I mean by that, and I really do mean this with respect, because because I am not a religious person at all, right? So when I talk about these stories, I think I read it as a history of resistance, right? So the New Testament is a history of resistance. It really is, because what came before the Pharisees, trying to trap Jesus in kind of advocating, oh yeah, don't pay your taxes. What are you, crazy? No, we're not going to pay taxes to that Caesar. What preceded that was that Jesus was prophesied as being the new king, right? That he was going to come and lead this revolution that would overthrow the existing kingdoms, the kingdoms of man. And so the Pharisees presenting him with this, they were seeking to trap him because they thought their trap would work. Because, well, how can you be a revolutionary? How can you overthrow the kingdoms of man if you're not going to, go after Caesar's money? And this was, I think, the hardest thing to recognize about the revolution of Jesus and the gospel. And again, I say this, I'm not in the least religious, right? But the revolution that Jesus was talking about, And the reason he said, render unto God that which is God's is the revolution is in our own hearts, right? That's the message, that the revolution is not to take arms up against Caesar and try to not pay taxes. No, that's a secular world that you got to leave that to Caesar. And it really is the same thing with money. It's not that fiat money is that Caesar's and nothing else is. Look, a gold coin, that was Caesar's money too, right? And you can go out and you can mine gold the same way you can quote unquote mine Bitcoin. So it's the point of the parable was not that, oh, it's this kind of money that you should give to Caesar, but there's another kind of currency, another kind of secular currency that is somehow separate from that. No, the point of the parable was that all money, right, all mediums of exchange by which the government taxes you. I mean, that's why money exists, right? Because governments want to tax you. And that what Jesus was saying was you can't play on that field, because if you do, you will lose. And we see this over and over again, that if you try to take on the state in that kind of revolution, you better be prepared to bring guns and bombs next, right? Because this notion that, oh, we can kind of subvert money and government, because they're not very smart, they don't really know what's going on, that this will all just happen away from them and it'll be too late. That's nuts. I mean, and again, it's not that it's being done, and we're seeing this today. It's not that this all happens with a stick. It's not that this happens with a jackboot. It's not that we get the crypto exchanges get banned, right, or made illegal. No, it happens. The stick is through narrative, which is kind of where we're starting this conversation, right? The stick is oh, you're thinking about doing Bitcoin. Well, don't you know that only terrorists use that? What are you? When are you still supporting ISIS? You must be. You must be a terrorist sympathizer, right? If you're dabbling in this Bitcoin and the like, and everyone listening to this podcast knows that's just ludicrous, and yet it doesn't matter, right? Because the widespread acceptance isn't going to come when you've got what we're calling game theory, the missionaries, right? The media is going to be dominated by these stories, and there will be show trials, right? There will be examples of this. And then the carrot, so if that's the stick of narrative and of shunning this, the carrot is something like Libra, right? So even if it's not Libra, it'll be something like it, where again, it's not censorship resistant, it's censorship embracing. It's just a dollar is just fiat, but in electronic form, right? So why wouldn't you want to use that? Look how convenient this is. Oh my goodness, you'll get you'll get all sorts of goodies for your e-commerce on Amazon. I mean, Amazon I think will be the next one to launch their form of currency here. You get this carrot and the stick through the form of narrative, and that's how government co-opts this. And when I really think we could be doing so much more on these other questions of distributed trust that don't have anything to do with money, and the reason that people don't get excited about them is that we're all coyotes. We're on the make. We're trying to make money as well as do good. And the tough love I'm trying to describe really is that same parable of 2,000 years ago, that you have to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and if you try to make money while doing good in the form of financial services, you're falling prey to a Spanish prisoner colony.
Yeah, I think that maybe I just I didn't word it correctly, but that is kind of my thought is what Bitcoin is that it is that thing that's outside of the not playing their game, right? That if you want to win, you can't you can't try to play the game that they own the rules to, and that's why I've always felt that Bitcoin was in a way. I mean, yes, it's money and all that. There was a gentleman in Bitcoin named Murad Mammadov who talked about that the difference between Bitcoin and gold is that gold kind of needs the whole thing to come crashing down in fire and brimstone, right? For it to actually, if you want gold to replace fiat and go back to a gold standard, the fiat system really does have to pretty much just kind of just blow up for gold to rise back up. In a lot of the narratives, when you talk to people who are gold bugs, right? It's always like, well, once this whole thing crashes down and we have this massive recession and reset and everything, the people are going to want a gold backed currency again. Where he had always talked about how Bitcoin kind of didn't need to, that it would just naturally, it could. Now, it can go either way, but that it could, kind of in a military term, kind of basically in place, just replace things over time by not playing their game. You're operating outside of it, but I always, and that Bitcoin's very existence itself was a signal that you know subsidiarity or decentralized consensus, if it's possible for money, it's possible for everything else. That its very existence was this kind of signal to the world of that we need to consider this made a game. Uh, you know, consider it that it is possible that it's not just the status quo that we've lived under, and really nation states are pretty recent. It's really not that old that or not that long that we've had kind of this concept. But maybe I didn't word it that way, but I do see Bitcoin in that way that you described it as. You're not, don't try to take up arms, because that's what the Jewish rebellions had been up until that point. Even after, it was physical rebellions,
That's right.
taking up arms, trying to kick the Romans out. And that was never going to happen. The Romans were not going to. At that point, they were strong enough. That was not going to happen.
But Dustin, let me ask you. I mean, because I think
Yeah.
that argument about the gradual, I'll call it the gradualism where Bitcoin becomes too big for it becomes its own thing. It seems to me that conflates Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and Bitcoin as a store of value. And the difference being, right, if it is, which is the narrative that I see for Bitcoin now, that, oh, yes, we are digital gold, we are a store of value. And if that's the case, if that's your view, then you're never going to use it as a medium of exchange. And no more than if I make an investment in the stock market, I'm going to use my stock market investments to, buy a cup of coffee, right? So it's there's this kind of waving of the hands I find in the Bitcoin community about two things. One, this kind of conflation, not kind of this conflation of store of value and medium of exchange, and then also the other thing that I find the hand waving happens, and I think Libra is I think kind of being a good wake up moment for a lot of people in the community, is that if there is the potential for I'll say money to be made with this, right? That for it to take over as a convenient and useful and widespread medium of exchange, well, you better believe that the the smart guys at Amazon and at Google and at Microsoft and at Facebook are looking about, again, taking this over, co-opting this. It's the this the people who are involved in Bitcoin aren't the only smart coyotes in the world,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
And what we're seeing with Libra, I think, again, is just a classic example of an oligarchy, right? A massive corporation saying, all right, there's a good narrative here. There's a good story around Bitcoin, right? It's got a good beat. You can dance to it. We want to figure out a way that we can control it, right? And we want to figure out a way where we can do it in partnership with Caesar rather than against him. So that's what I mean about being set up from the outset, right? To be permissioned and to be censorship embracing, not censorship resistant. And the advantage of doing that is that you can tell a story of convenience, and you can avoid the story which is there and is just going to grow, the story that cash and the story that censorship resistant coins are the tools of terrorists and criminals, right? So the government wants to move us to electronic cash, right? They don't want Bitcoin out there, but they also don't want paper money out there either. Right? The whole goal here is to exercise more control, not less. And my view is that there's so much time and energy and effective resistance that is lost by, again, to kind of to your point, fighting the state on its own ground, on its own terms, in the realm of money. I get why people say, "Oh, we're going to do that." It's because they want to make some money. But again, my tough love is that you can make money. You can make money trading gold. You can make money trading Bitcoin. Do that. But make some money trading it. But don't think that it is some tool of revolution, right? Because inherently it's going to get co-opted, and it's going to be, and you're going to be co-opted if you continue going down that path.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point. And that's why I was having a bit of it's been a bit of an argument with, or debate, I should say, with some people in the Bitcoin community on Twitter recently. As with the Libra hearings, it's been kind of on the front of everybody's, on the tip of their tongue. Everyone's been talking about it. It was very interesting. To me, it seemed very dog and pony. There are people in Congress that do have issues with it, but to me, whether or not it's actually Libra that is a quote unquote approved, or whatever you want to call it, and Google's going to release their own, Amazon's going to release their own, probably institutional banking organizations, whether it's JPM Coin and Goldman, I've already talked about, or JPM's already out there, but that's already a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen. This is a dog and pony show for them to air out their grievances, but like you said, the concept of cashless society has been something that's been wanted for a long time. The ability to track every transaction, to even have immediate taxation possibly upon with the buying and selling of stuff, whether it's at a garage sale or whatever, is very attractive. And plus, having that panopticon of knowing what everybody's buying, where they're at, is just massive. And I do see that as a major threat to Bitcoin. Me personally, I don't think in the long run, I think that Bitcoin is successful. But I think definitely in the short to medium term, what you're going to see is, as you alluded to, with the concept of terrorism and drug running. These were memes that we saw in 2013 that never quite took hold. It was bandied about, and I was kind of surprised that they jumped off that narrative. But what I see is that once this censorship embracing coin jumps in, and becomes, starts to take root, is given basically the hominis dominus that everything's good, that narrative is going to get spun up, that Bitcoin's the dark market money. It's the money that is used to buy the absolute worst things in society. And they're not even going to talk about drugs, because that has started to switch. Definitely in the last 10 years, people are less they're not crazy about someone doing drugs, but the concept of it's not as much of a punch. But you can imagine all the stuff that goes on dark markets as well that anybody from any walk of life is going to have a problem with, because Bitcoin does not censor those transactions natively. It can't. That's what's going to get brought up. And Libra.
Well, Dustin, let me ask you a question. When you say that you see Bitcoin being successful
Mhm.
eventually, what do you mean by success?
Well, that's a really interesting question too, because does it? I don't see. I guess it depends on the timeline that we're talking about as well. But let's just say 100 years or something along those lines. I don't see sovereign currencies going away. I don't see that this idea that most Bitcoiners don't um, say this, but I have heard some people go like, well, Bitcoin's going to control everybody's going to be using Bitcoin or whatever. I don't see that. I see that once we've opened up this Pandora's box of competing currencies, and it's very kind of Hayekian, in this kind of concept of private issuance of currencies, that you're going to have competition constantly. But I see, as far as for Bitcoin becoming a universally trusted store of value, and then other layers built on top of it using that to actually transact with. And you kind of talked about that earlier, of store of value and medium of exchange. And this is a very internal, inside baseball issue that we've seen even split the community in the last couple of years, of which direction do you go first? Do you go for medium exchange, or do you go for store of value?
BCH or
Mhm.
exactly.
And so if you, depending on who you talk to, they'll have a different kind of opinion. But the consensus of the majority of people seems to be that Bitcoin, at least when you're talking about market cap and hash rate, Bitcoin as a store of value seems to be the meme that has come out on top. And I tend to agree with that's a better, at least it seems to be what is becoming more and more accepted as what Bitcoin should be first versus a medium of exchange. But kind of jumping out of that, where I see it as being successful is that it's it's beyond just a niche group of I guess you want to call us true believers. And I use this term not in a negative way, but there's cults everywhere, right? So everyone's in a cult. It just depends on what you are. And outside of the Bitcoin cult, we've had an issue breaking out past I kind of call it basically the fourth wave, which was speculators. First wave was developers, cypherpunks. Second wave was kind of political people, and the third and fourth-ish waves kind of intermingle as speculators, right? People want to make money, the Coyotes and a lot of Raccoons. And the fifth wave is really kind of the average person, and what they want is something easy. They want a Venmo. They want something that's simple and easy to do, where it's the path of least resistance, and Bitcoin has not done that. And where I see it is where we break through that wall into the next wave of adoption, where it just becomes ubiquitous with you. We don't have this problem yet in the West, really, where you have to worry about your savings dropping 20% overnight, right? Or, you found $100 bill underneath your bed, and you don't have to worry about now that buys, 80% less than it did the year ago when you dropped it. But so I see this as being something that people gravitate to, just because they know and trust that it is not going to, that they can trust putting their money into it, and it holding their value in the long term and appreciating in value. At some point, we'll reach an equilibrium of what that value is.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate the, just giving me a chance to kind of ask a question, that because it's kind of these questions I haven't really had anyone to ask.
Right? And I will say, it's just as a caveat though, if you ask different people within the Bitcoin space, they will give you a different definition of what this is mine, and where I see it going. But this is just based on my very subjective experience and what I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, for that next wave, right? You're describing the mass adoption. And I'm answering this. This is not a pointed question. It's not a leading question. What gives you confidence that broadly accepted broadly trusted um, coin would come from an evolution of Bitcoin as opposed to a Fed coin, right,
Mm-hmm.
or an Amazon coin. I think, God, I hope Libra doesn't succeed, right? I mean, that's why I wrote the article, because I think it's part of a larger con. But I think all of these are part of a larger um, Spanish prisoner con, right? But these cons work because they really do dangle the narrative of both carrot and stick, right? They it's so much easier for an Amazon to offer a coin of convenience, right, than Bitcoin. It's so much easier for a giant corporation, an Amazon, in conjunction with the United States government, to say, not only do you get the convenience, but this is a coin that we're tracking, and so it can't be used by those darn terrorists, right? So, and again, and this is not a pointing question. I want it's a straight question, right? What what is it that gives you the confidence that greater adoption can come through Bitcoin as opposed to these other initiatives that are coming down the pipe?
Yeah. So, it's hard to describe why X would fail in the future, like a Fed coin, because not knowing what the particulars are. But like just
Right.
taking Libra for example, it's based in fiat currencies that are
Yep.
run by central banks that will continually inflate, and the kind of trajectory that we're seeing with debt associated with each of these nations, and kind of the parabolic, especially in the United States, when we're looking at just the interest on the debt that we're going to be looking at in the next 5 to 10 years, is astronomical. I don't have, and I don't, and like I said, I just been starting to read Epsilon theory within the last couple of months, so
Hmm.
I don't know your exact background. What your economic kind of school that you ascribe to, but I don't believe that inflationary currencies run by central banks, that they eventually will all fail. The U.S. dollar's had a really good long run, and post World War II and Bretton Woods has really given us a lot of, and plus all the soft and hard power that we've wielded to keep that in power over the years. I don't have faith in fiat currencies lasting in the long run. So
Right.
if your
Right.
backing is all fiat, eventually those by nature actually devalue over time. So your Libra is going to devalue over time. Where if you look at Bitcoin as a deflationary asset, it's going to consistently increase in value over time. There are issues with deflationary assets as well, but when people are in time looking at, well, I've held this Libra and it's lost 2, 3, 4% of its purchasing power, where the Bitcoin that I may have bought 3 years ago has increased 20% or whatever, right? Where it's constantly increasing, or if it reaches an equilibrium, roughly staying the same, whereas an inflationary asset constantly goes down over time. So they will, in my mind, have to be, as this fiat currency fails or whatever. For what I feel that they will end up having to do is they will have to compete with deflationary assets, or at least much more stable non-inflationary assets. They will have to start to add those to their baskets, and kind of start to render moot the concept of what they're if you have a 50% Bitcoin backing, let's say, in the future, then it's like, why don't I just hold that asset in the first place? With what like, let's just say they do like a Fed coin, but they decide to actually do it right, or at least what we Bitcoiners would say do it right, which is a decentralized consensus. There's no centralized node operation like with Libra, where you have at some point in the future have 100 guys and an association who can dictate the state of the network. They can change it. They can roll back transactions. There's nothing stopping Libra from rolling back transactions and taking money out of your account. if they want to. Let's just say they decide to abide by some sanctions agreement and they decide to dump out, this country, which had a bunch of Libra, now is no longer appreciated. And if they really wanted to, they could identify those accounts and roll that money out.
Absolutely.
And that's why I don't see it as, I see, like you talk about an effete rebellion, but with Bitcoin, for those on the outskirts, definitely, that's where I see the major adoption. It's either going to be speculators in the United States at first, or in the West, I should say, but also a lot of people who can't participate in Libra, or can't afford to. So it's really hard to speculate on how that wins, but I see Bitcoin. And we talked about cults. We talk about faith, right, within these cults, right? Because a lot of stuff we do within our cult is taken on faith in a way. And this is once again back to a theological kind of concept, but they talk about Bitcoin's immaculate conception, where it started and it grew before anybody really knew what it was, right? And it got that kind of much decentralized, wider status, where now if you try to launch something, it's really hard because everyone's kind of aware, and the Coyotes and the Raccoons are running in going like, I want to get in at the, at the bottom level to be the next Bitcoin, right? So you see a lot of more centralizing aspects with anybody that tries to launch anything, which is why I understand why Libra kind of did what they did. And I don't see them ever, as much as they say in 5 years they're going to go permissionless and make this a quote unquote decentralized protocol. I find that to be smoke and mirrors.
I agree. Hey, Dustin, we've got to kind of wrap things up. I know, pretty soon.
Yeah, of course.
Let me give you an alternative view, right, about how Bitcoin can succeed, right, and it doesn't rely on the notion of fiat currencies collapsing, ultimately under their own weight, because I'll tell you that that is the gold view. Right, that what you were saying there, the Austrian view and that approach, it's old wine in a new bottle, right?
That's fair enough.
And I get it, and I'm sympathetic to it, but I want to give you a more hopeful rationale, and it's why I not just enjoy, but I think it's so important. For me and guys like me, right, to engage with you and the community. And here's my alternative view of how Bitcoin can not just survive but thrive. Because what Bitcoin has got going for it, and this has been my big evolution over the last 4 years. It's not the elegance of the code. It's not the math. It's not this particular aspect. It is the sheer horsepower of the people who are engaged in this project. There is a positive energy, and I don't have I write for a living, and I wish I had a better phrase than positive energy, but I don't have one. There's a positive energy, a spirit of the age, a zeitgeist associated with this community that is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. And this is why I want to engage with it. This is why I want to, I hope, try to channel this energy into a form of resistance, a form of sovereignty, a form of independence and autonomy that I think is at the heart of this positive energy that can be realized without confronting the government head on their turf, on their rules. But there is this positive energy. There is just this raw intellectual horsepower and spirit in this community that's unlike anything I've ever seen. And to me, if there's what gives me hope, right, that all this can, again, not just survive but thrive, it's that, right? It doesn't rest in some dead Austrian economist's view of debt or the like. It resides in the ingenuity and the spirit of the people who are engaged in it on a day-to-day basis. So maybe that's a pretty good kind of line to go out on, Dustin. I've enjoyed this so much, and it just every opportunity I can to kind of make more connections in this community. It's a blessing for me.
Well, no, I agree. I think that is a great note to finish on, and I would like to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's late where you are at, and I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. How can people follow you and get a hold of you, and who do you want to hear from?
You bet. So it's epsilontheory.com. And my name's Ben Hunt, Hunt. So I'm at Epsilon Theory on Twitter, and the blog is epsilontheory.com. Thank you, Dustin.
Well, thank you so much. You have a great night.
Appreciate it.